I'm Duane Schulthess, and on this Vital Health podcast, I'm speaking to successful entrepreneur Steve Potts, a serial entrepreneur who's had many successful companies. Steve recently founded SLAM BioTherapeutics and was appointed the chair of the Drug Development Council of the International Cancer Advocacy Network. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
So, SLAM BioTherapeutics, what is it? What are you doing now?
This is a company that was founded out of the City of Hope with Dr. Steve Rosen, who's a highly regarded leukemia expert in the space. And he's been studying a novel target called CD84. We're developing an antibody and an antibody drug conjugate, which is a large molecule that delivers a small molecule into the cell to kill cancers.
So, large molecule antibody focus. That's... Yes. You've mostly been
a little different than a year ago. Isn't that a surprise?
What a shock. You've mostly been a small molecule guy, and funny, you're moving into large molecules. Why?
Well,
the leading question of the day already.
If these companies take a long time to fund. It's easy to say we're all successful, but the truth is, a few of these hit and many, many don't. So it's an economic funding decision. And when you only have 9 years to pay back that return, for a small molecule versus 13, which is what the IRA Act has done, an investor looks at that and says, well, double the return.
Now,
or half the return with a small molecule. They're very, very difficult to get funded right now.
Now, I was part of the Congressional Healthcare Task Force that another colleague of yours, Peter Kolchinsky, was on. He and I testified and spoke with the current head of the Congressional Budget Office and Congressman Burgess, et cetera. And we were assured by the CBO that this would not impact drug discovery at all. Basically nonsense.
Well, I've heard it was a 1% impact.
1% impact.
Well, I will tell you, it's at 100% impact on me. You don't hear me funding a small molecule program. You hear me funding antibody drug conjugates, biologicals. I don't know how you can come to a 1%. These are. I'm really just an example of, there's hundreds of us that are working to develop a new drug, whether it's a biologic or small molecule. And all of us are talking to investors and saying, you have to have the stability of the return in order to pay for the hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to get it to advance a drug. And when the small molecule cuts it off at 9, half the time you can actually make your revenue back. It's the bar for funding a small molecule is incredibly high right now.
And you did a survey.
I did.
Of 100 VCs. And we've talked about this before. And I think it's good to go back to this. In that survey, you found 75% of VCs were saying, we're rotating out of small molecules and changing our focus. Yeah. Is this still what you see? Is this still de rigueur? Is this what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, that survey was done, 100 venture capitalists, people that I work with, colleagues in the space. It was an informal survey, but I think it was probably very, very honest in terms of they were able to really speak their mind. And they were saying they're looking ahead and saying very likely to make funding decisions. That's all come to fruition. I think that the number I had was 6 out of 7 were making changes away from small molecules to biologics or out of the space, leaving the space to do AI or something that's not going to directly affect health at that time. And we're seeing that. And it's probably higher. In fact, I would say find me the 7th one that actually is saying, I'm willing to have half my return to fund a small molecule.
So when we last spoke, we were on my patio in Orange County about 4 days, 72 hours before your presentation for Energy and Commerce in the U.S. Congress. What was the feedback on that? How did it go?
I think people were grateful that, I'm one of 100,000 biotech CEOs that are working to put a business plan together to meet an unmet need. And I think the Congress is very grateful to hear from that. I think they'd forgotten that two things. One is that drug development is very much of an American enterprise. We are just doing an incredible job in this country of drug development. Look at any statistic. And secondly, that this is a small business enterprise. 75%, I'm forgetting the number, I've been fundraising, so it's not right in front of me, but it's something like 75% or more of all the clinical trials going on are small businesses. And most of those are American firms.
We just released a large study on the general pharmaceutical legislation in the EU. And we have a cohort of 350 novel type 1 FDA approvals. And so we said, okay, let's just, for the sake of doing this, because we wanted to see the impact on European innovation, let's just take drugs that were innovated within the EU 27 and then produced by EU 27 companies. So from 350, we got 17. That was it. So the idea that, this is not an American enterprise. I mean, the U.S. now is over 60% of global innovation. Now, here's what's scary, Steve. In 1980, Europe was doing 60% of that innovation. It's completely flipped. Are you concerned that with these continuing attacks, we're going to end up going the way of Europe?
What's really interesting is that the states that have the most biotech, California, Massachusetts, also have the most anti-biotech leaders. And I'm just surprised, New Jersey, that they're not called on the floor to that. The other countries support their industries. They fight for, look at how hard China fights for their biotech industry. We're seeing some of that happening. It would be really nice to see more American leaders in this country fight for what is a quintessential American industry.
But you have set up in Arizona.
I have.
So, and I just met this morning with the guys from Nashville Bioscience, and they're doing a ton of work, and stuff is moving to Nashville and Tennessee. My God, the situation in Texas and Austin is booming with biotech. I mean, we're seeing a huge move. In fact, Arizona at one point last year was the top 5 markets for growth in biotech.
It's been growing like crazy. But, we have 2 senators. We have an amazing mayor for the city of Phoenix, 5th largest city in the country. First, in terms of growth in high tech and biotech, we've had a history of a really good governor. It was very pro business for 8 years. And we don't take business for granted there. We just don't think that magically drugs appear. We understand they have to get funded and investors have to have their return. And when you offer 2 things and you say, this one is a small molecule, half the time to get your return. This one is a large molecule, just enough time to get your return. What are investors going to do? And the thing is, Duane, they don't just move to biologics, they leave the space.
Right.
And I can guarantee you, it's great to see green energy, it's great to see AI, whatever, but that's not going to help them so many unmet needs in rare disease and oncology, in neurology. We'd love to talk about that.
Sure.
Where's that funding coming from? Most of the funding for all of these drugs is private industry, and you can't take, industry for granted. And I think that's what we've forgotten in some of the coastal states, particularly the leaders in California and in Massachusetts.
And before we came on mic and before we got wired up here, I was showing you some preliminary work we're working on that I'll be showing at DIA next week. I mean, neurology, heavily dependent on the Medicare age population. Our thesis was, where we disagreed with CBO, we would probably see a huge rotation out of small molecules, particularly those with a huge exposure to Medicare. So we said, well, let's pull all the clinical trials we can find for smallish companies under 5 billion, and let's see what we're seeing in small and large molecules. And lo and behold, we're seeing a rotation from 2018, 98% small molecules to, in 2024 so far, 0.
Yeah, and I had to look at your graph, and it's not in front of me, but there's a big X. I mean, you don't even have to have, the line goes like this and this. It's a flip. I mean, the
complete change
in neurology. You think about Alzheimer's. These are small molecules that get into the brain, and the same thing with things like metastatic brain cancer and GBM. You want a small molecule, and that was terrifying to see that. But it doesn't surprise me. In fact, I'm trying to think of a small molecule, neurosciences that's really getting adequately funding at this point, especially the ones right now that are really the cures for the next, 10 years from now. I'd love to see that. And it doesn't surprise me at all, but it's tragic because, a hospital is going to provide the exact same Alzheimer's care and Parkinson's care that they did 20 years ago, and probably about the same they're going to provide 20 years from now. Probably higher costs. A drug is different. I mean, look what's happened in weight loss drugs and it's game changing. Do you want to just cripple that? I mean, you think about what a drug does. It can't get approved unless it fundamentally changes healthcare. So to see an Alzheimer's drug or Parkinson's disease get approved, it will have an immediate effect. Yes, it's got to pay back the return, but you're not talking about investing in the same thing, the exact same hospital experiments you've had, for 30 years, and all that just at 10% of the cost. Drugs are just a phenomenal deal for the American taxpayer, the healthy people as well as the sick. And I hate to see a graph like that because it just shows me that, this is the early canary in the coal mine. I'd love to see oncology because frankly, I went round and round with Peter Kolchinsky on this and others too. And
who hasn't gone round and
he's so sharp that he is not going to miss anything. So I said, look, I tried about 8 different ways to really sell him that I kind of figured out how to get a small molecule funded that wasn't going to get just massively hammered by the IRA with only 9 years. And, it completely changes how we think of oncology. I was a small part of a company, did my role, the TRK inhibitor that was entirely done because you get an approval of a small indication and then you build on that. And so many of these indications are like that. But you take that away. You say, why would I get an approval for a small indication when the clock starts? And I will say, let's not make this all doom and gloom. There's a couple exciting bills. There's one for orphan that the bio is exciting, and I saw this starting to happen even when I was giving my testimony. There was interest on both sides of the aisle, particularly by people that were not anti-biotech and crazily anti-biotech, that said, let's come together and let's have a bill to fix this 913, and they could do it basically in a cost neutral manner. And so that started. There is a bill being moved through. I think we got to, keep focusing on that. Keep reminding people that, this matters. And so I think there is some real positive things. I think these bills I'm very encouraged by. And I think I'm reminded, let me just tell you one thing.
Sure.
And all of us that develop drugs, we all get up in the morning thinking that I can make my difference in cancer for me, right? 25 years of doing that. And I think in my own small way, I make a small difference there. And somebody else in neurology thinks they can make a difference in Alzheimer's by doing a drug. I think as a biotech industry, and I challenge my colleagues on this, we've forgotten that we also can make a difference in policy. We're Americans. You have the right to vote. You have the right to, in fact, change. But there's just this idea that I can cure cancer, but I can't get a bill passed.
Yeah.
I mean, really? A bill is just like, it's just like a drug. It takes a long time. Yes, it's hard. There's a lot of failures. But as an industry, we've just got to stop thinking that, we can't get it done. We can get it done, but I just feel like there's a very positive message here. There's some exciting bills that have happened because a very small group of people have come together and do this. And one of the things I've been working with a number of people is to really look at who's actively supporting our industry while they're doing their job. Believe me, this is the only meeting I've taken that isn't just about either raising money or doing the 50,000 things you got to do to get
and we're grateful, Steve. It's always great to talk to you, sir. There's some of us that do spend some of our time as a hobby to really help and give back and think about how do we really, make a difference to get some of these things fixed. But if we had more of us doing it, I think you'd see more of that. So anyway. But let me come back to that because I agree with you, but I don't think you were done any services by a lot of the CEOs who went to JP Morgan 2 months after IRA was passed and went on stage and say, oh no, we see limited impact on our portfolio. Well, they did this, they said this, and this is the problem. I mean, you're fighting uphill then because the Congress critters and the folks in Congress are going, well, see, they're saying it's not a problem.
And I think, I started somewhere in my testimony, I don't remember where it was, but I always say, look, let me tell you drug development. If you take a room full of us, I'm 50, I'm halfway through my career, and say, raise your hands after, 30 or 40 years of work, have you cured cancer in mice? Every hand goes up, right? And then you say, okay, how many of you actually have a drug, oncology drug or other drug that's given to patients? And, the number of hands, go up. I've been involved in 2 successful drugs, but a tiny little part of those. We forget that this is really hard. And it's easy to just say, wildly successful, talk about our successes. But the truth is, in our careers, we get a couple successful drugs if we're really fortunate. And then you have a huge number of things that just simply don't work out. And, I think the messaging, when you hear those kinds of things at JP Morgan, what you're hearing is there's no problem, we're successful. Everyone's afraid to say, no, this is devastating. You cannot cut the return in half for small molecules and think there's not an impact.
Well, it was really interesting. About a month ago, the head of oncology, Varnett from Pfizer, was quoted in an article in The Morning, a trade journal, saying, oh, yes, we're switching our portfolio and we anticipate to be more than 90% large molecules in oncology by 2030. And then that afternoon in the shareholder call, the CEO said, oh, we see no impact of IRA the same day.
But keep in mind, that's all the late stage drugs. I mean, and let me paint another picture. So like, for example, in the KRAS space, some super exciting things going on with
which you have a lot of personal experience with.
I've been involved. A lot of my friends are in that area. I've helped a couple companies here and there with that. But in that space, there's some incredibly successful drugs going in the market. I am involved in a nonprofit that helps patients with a lot of them with RAS actually find drugs. And they're screaming for all these other indications in RAS that are currently not met. It's really hard to fund these new companies that are going to do something new in the space and build the second and third and fourth generation, like we saw with Tagrisso after 20 years, how great it is. So yeah, you can see that that these late stage small molecules, you're seeing the stories about, but in terms of the earlier things, that's where it's getting hit. And these are the small businesses in the U.S. that are really having a much harder time with small molecule funding.
Now, picking up on that, PitchBook ran an article 4 months ago, an analysis of 2023. And they said that, I think the number was 38% of VCs in 2023 had just completely stopped trading, stopped investing, period. So 2 out of 5.
Yeah, across biotech,
yes,
and all sectors.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all right, here we are. We're at Bio, 20,000 plus people here. Many like you out pounding pavement trying to raise some dough to get your funding for, get your product started. How is the climate now? Have you seen an improvement since last year? Since, PitchBook said 2 out of 5 are done?
Yeah, it's improving, and things are, good ideas and good teams are getting funded. I'm excited to see some of my friends. I'm frankly, super excited about a leukemia drug we're working on with City of Hope and Dr. Rosen, and meeting huge unmet need in a couple just really nasty blood cancer areas with SLAM BioTherapeutics. So I think if you check the right boxes, and you can get funded, but the small molecule space, the bar is extremely high.
Yeah.
And what it does is actually it brings the creativity down, because people are not willing to fund the new ideas.
Right.
So I can guarantee you right now, if all the KRAS was started over, it wouldn't be getting funded.
No kidding.
If it was a new idea instead of already a validated, couple new drugs, you wouldn't see that funding for something new like that. So in small molecules, the bar is just, and again, it's not a hard concept. You've cut the funding in half. Those last 4 years is where you make half of your revenue. I mean, and people should know that, because healthcare, everything is slow. I mean, you think that our sales ramp up immediately. You need a number of years to really ramp up. When you cut those 9 to 13 years off, you're not going to pay back the return.
And the problem is as well, that's where you've written off all your front end investment. You've got all your manufacturing covered. I mean, those are in what they call in strategy. That's called, those are your cash cows.
Yeah. And it in oncology, it cuts off all the creativity.
Yeah.
I mean, what I loved about some of the things that, I started in diagnostics for 10 years, and then the last 15 years I've been doing drug development, but it's the ability to take all this diagnostic knowledge about how to find these kind of different niches of patients, and then apply that in oncology in the drug side. That's been so fun over the last 15 years. You cut all that off because you can't be creative like that. You have to sit and predict, this is going to be my big population. I'm just going to launch there. And if I have encouraging signs in patients that need drug in some niche areas, I'm going to stop there, because I can't afford to have that 9-year clock. And by the way, it's really a 7-year clock, because you see it's not a negotiation. At 7 years, they tell you what your price is going to be. It's astonishing. We're seeing this in what is a free market society.
Allegedly. Yeah. So you've worked with Dr. Rosen on this new asset that you're bringing to market. All right. It's a large molecule, an antibody, fine. But the reality is it's quite conceivable that he has received some level of NIH, National Institutes of Health funding. Now, on top of everything else we're dealing with, the Biden administration and the current HHS has now put out a strategy document saying that we may start applying march-in rights, which means the government can come in on any asset that's received federal funding. We don't like your price. We're going to start negotiating because this received an element of government funding. What would happen if, again, what's going to happen?
The obvious.
I know.
The absolutely obvious, which is that just start funding companies where none of it came from federally funded work. So, but imagine what that does to to everything. I mean, and even it was a really successful entrepreneur, and Dr. Rosen started this company together with a team of very experienced people, and they worked for a number of years in publications. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the minimum spend. To then say, this is an interesting target. And then from there you have to develop an antibody. And this is interesting too. So since I've been doing small molecule and large, I'm very current in terms of pricing and the comparators between, and I'm of course doing a large molecule, a small molecule, hanging on to it, the ADC, even more current. So just to get that idea, you have about $10-15 million to take that idea and then say, I've tested it adequately enough to say, this is going to be a development candidate. That's $10-15 million. Okay. Yeah. From there, you have the manufacturing cost. To manufacture an antibody is $6-7 million. To do a small molecule, $2-3 million. Right. And then, and those numbers kind of they go that way. So we're basically, not only are we, cutting off at our knees the ability to do the small molecule, but we're funding the most expensive development path, which is the biologics are more expensive than the small molecules. And we're seeing that. You have to raise more money to do a biologic.
But on top of that as well, when the small molecule goes generic, I mean, you could put it in your pocket, you put it in a case, they travel with you, they become cheap as, they become essentially free. I mean, there was a period a couple of years ago when Lipitor went off patent. The British government was talking about adding it into the water supply.
The small molecule path was not broken. I mean, if you look at like lung cancer. I mean, when I started my career in 1997, 1998, everyone thought you don't do lung cancer because there's no way anything would be successful. But there was one company with the Tarceva that just might make it, an EGFR, maybe. And there was one other drug kind of sniffing around an ALK, maybe. But it was like, how people think of GBM and pancreatic cancer today, or weight loss, frankly, a few years ago.
Yeah.
And everyone knew it was not. So that small molecule is not broken. You just look at the success in lung cancer. Look at where we're at with Tagrisso and some of these other just amazing small molecule drugs. But that's a stairway. It's taken the time. And so it's just, what is so frustrating is that the regulation has gone after the area that is the least problematic in terms of going generic. I am a firm believer these drugs need to go generic, or at least be generically priced. We can't talk out of both sides of our mouths and say, look, we need, adequate pricing in this patent protected period, and then not also fight and say, well, why the heck is a 30-year-old drug not gone generic in pricing?
Yeah.
So we do need to police ourselves. But the small molecule piece was the part that was the absolute least broken.
What's interesting, if you talk to the companies, and we talk to our clients all the time, and we've been asked to look at this problem specifically and how it relates to, let's be honest, if Trump gets elected, he's already said he wants to open up most favored nations. Now, the most favored nations executive order is currently sitting with a court injunction filed by Bio. Our economic analysis is part of that package. We're part of the federal case. So Trump's already said, we said it in May of 2023. We're going to open up, we're going to come in, file the petition. Boom, it's back in. So we're already going to see international pricing pressure potentially come back in. The reality is, wouldn't a solution be, IRA is basically a Mickey Mouse ear bolted on to Hatch-Waxman. So they basically put a Hatch-Waxman solution into IRA. Isn't the compromise here, isn't the solution for industry to say, okay, mea culpa, yeah, okay, fine. We don't we're not going to go 30 years anymore. Let's go with 20 years. Let's make that a maximum. Similar to what Europe has, you have 15 years of sales. And that everyone knows that. Yeah, and no one has a problem with that.
Fine with that.
Is that a potential?
9?
Yeah, exactly. Is that a potential solution here?
I'm kind of known for my career of doing a lot of things internationally, whether it's on the sales side or on the med affairs side. I've built multiple med affairs teams, a couple different commercial teams in the diagnostic side in previous life. So I have a kind of international bent, and I have a lot of friends in oncology, in Europe in particular. And you ask them, they don't get the drugs. The delay is at least a year and a half, 2 years behind U.S. And you say, and I don't think they realize how much they're basically just getting free books at the library, where the Americans are paying for the bookstores. And so they don't realize until the American market falls apart, they won't see see the impact. I haven't written a business plan in probably 10 years where I even mentioned Europe or Asia in terms of sales.
No kidding.
In fact, I used to always have an asterisk. So I'd say, annual, if you probably look at our SLAM BioTherapeutics,
sure.
we map all these unmet needs and in 4 different really, really tough blood cancer areas, and how many patients per year, and what the unmet need is. I used to always have a clear asterisk that said, number of incidents per year on the bottom. It said U.S. numbers. Sometimes I forget to put them on there. We just all assume, of course, it's U.S. numbers.
Right.
You don't even talk about Europe. You don't talk about Asia because they're not paying their share.
Yeah. So where do you think this ends up? Let's say, I think no matter who is elected, it's looking like there's going to be more legislation. Where do you think we are in 2 or 3 years?
Let's do things where we can work together. There's nobody, when I messaged and talked with the Congress, there was nobody in that room that was deliberately saying, I want to kill off great new drugs. I don't want, new drugs for my parents, for me, for all the other people that have, diseases around me, or maybe me. But, let's look where we can work together. And I think there are some things, again, I think supporting these bills moving through to get a fix to make it 1313 so that they're treated equally, get a fix to the Orphan Act, do things where I frankly wish it was 15 years. It'd be better for us, but we can probably live with 13. So let's, there's some good things in the IRA, but let's build on those, and let's come together to fix some things that can get it fixed and work together.
Steve, it's always a huge pleasure seeing you, my friend, and I wish you all success with your new company.
Thank you.
Cheers. The executive producer of the Vital Health Podcast is Duane Schulthess. Our editor is Mark Brodeen. Our project manager is Gwen O'Loughlin. The Vital Health Podcast is a production of Vital Transformation, LLC, copyright 2024.